The night before the most important promotion pitch of my career, my father destroyed my $2,400 laptop in a fit of spite. He thought he'd ruined my chances. But what he didn't realize was that his sabotage would be the very thing that pushed me higher than I'd ever imagined. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. It happened on a Tuesday night. Though the memory feels etched into my bones as though it were yesterday, I had spent weeks preparing for a promotion pitch at my company, late nights fine-tuning every slide, every chart, and every phrase. This wasn't just another meeting on the calendar. This was the opportunity that could shift my entire career forward, securing a position that promised stability, recognition, and, perhaps most importantly, a sense of freedom from the shadow I'd been living under at home. My laptop, a sleek machine I had saved up for with months of careful budgeting, was more than just a piece of equipment. It was the vessel that carried my future. Every line of data, every carefully designed visual, every practice run of my speech, it all lived there. That machine was not just a tool. It was my anchor, the lifeline that tied me to the dream of building a career on my own terms. But in one violent moment, all of that was torn away. My father, in a drunken fit of bitterness, stormed into my room and, without a shred of hesitation, sent my laptop crashing to the floor. The crack of the screen snapping under his fist was sharp and final, like the slamming of a door. I remember staring at the shards of glass and the twisted hinges, feeling as though something inside me had broken alongside it. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, a cold wave rushed over me, leaving me numb. This wasn't the first time my father had lashed out, but it was the first time his anger had crossed into something so deliberately cruel, so destructive that it put my entire future at stake. And then came the words that would burn into me. Words I can still hear as clearly as if he were whispering them now. Maybe now, you'll learn not to think you're better than everyone else. The venom in his voice left no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't just drunken clumsiness. It was sabotage. Pure, intentional sabotage. I had grown used to his disapproval, his constant belittling of my work, his sneers about my office job, and the way he mocked my dedication to it. But this was different. This was him crossing a line, a deliberate attempt to drag me down into the same pit of failure and resentment he wallowed in. As I stood there, surrounded by broken glass and the smell of stale alcohol, a strange clarity came over me. I didn't know how yet, and I didn't know when. But one thing became certain in that moment. I would not let him win. That act of destruction would not be the end of my story. If anything, it would become the beginning. When I look back on that time, I realized the storm had been building long before the night my laptop was shattered. My father and I had been circling one another for years, locked in a tense push and pull that never truly found peace. I was in my early 30s then, a woman determined to finally carve out my own path. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it carried potential. I worked in a mid-sized company where the environment was competitive but fair. Those who put in effort and brought results were noticed. I had climbed steadily over the years, not by charm or luck, but by relentless work. That promotion pitch represented not just a bigger paycheck, but the recognition that my discipline and persistence mattered. My father, on the other hand, carried the weight of a different story. He was a man who had spent decades chasing opportunities that always seemed to slip through his fingers. Dead-end jobs, get-rich-quick schemes, Sudden bursts of ambition that fizzled into nothing. Life had left him bitter, and instead of owning his choices, he wrapped himself in resentment, lashing out at anyone who dared to succeed where he had failed. He never said it outright, but I could see it in his eyes. My ambition made him uncomfortable. It was as if every success I earned was a mirror reflecting back what he hadn't achieved, and he hated that mirror. I had moved back home temporarily to save money, a practical decision that, in theory, should have been a blessing. After all, housing costs were high, and being able to put away a little more each month was supposed to help me get ahead. But in practice, it felt like stepping into a cage. Every evening was an exercise in patience, enduring his jabs about how I owed him everything, how the roof over my head came with invisible strings attached. He had a particular dislike for my laptop. It wasn't just the cost, though. He never failed to remind me how ridiculous it was to spend that much on a toy. No, it was what the laptop represented. He saw me hunched over it late into the night, building something he couldn't understand, and it gnawed at him. That machine symbolized independence, discipline, and a world he couldn't control. There were warning signs, moments I brushed off as nothing more than drunken muttering, times when he'd casually remark, "One day the thing's going to break, and then we'll see how tough you are." Or when he'd laugh at me for working instead of relaxing, "You act like you're some big executive, but you're just a glorified secretary." I told myself not to let it get under my skin. I told myself he was just bitter, that his words couldn't touch me. But deep down, each comment lodged itself in me like a splinter. I kept working harder, trying to prove to myself and maybe to him that I was building something real. Oh, and for a while, I convinced myself I could live with the tension. I would focus on my job, save money, and eventually move out. My world was split into the professional life where I was valued and respected, and the home life where I was diminished at every turn. But what I didn't yet realize was that these two worlds were on a collision course. And the night he shattered my laptop, the two halves of my life finally collided in the most brutal way possible. The night it all came crashing down started like any other, at least on the surface. I had worked a long day at the office, then spent hours at home fine-tuning the last details of my pitch. The slides were polished, the numbers airtight, and the narrative of the presentation sharp enough to cut through any skepticism. By midnight, I felt a rare sense of calm. For once, I was confident. I had done everything within my power to prepare. That's when I heard the heavy, uneven footsteps in the hallway. My father's shuffle was unmistakable, accompanied by the faint clink of a bottle against the wall. I stiffened immediately. Living under his roof meant living with the unpredictability of his moods. Sometimes he was gruff but harmless. Other times his bitterness came out sharp and cruel. That night, I sensed the latter. The door to my room burst open without a knock, the way it always did when he'd been drinking. He leaned against the frame, eyes glassy, lips curled in that mocking half-smile that made my stomach tighten. "So," he slurred, "you're still up playing with that toy. What is it this time? Another slideshow to impress your bosses? Do they really pay you for this nonsense?" I took a steadying breath, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's important, Dad. Tomorrow I have a presentation that could mean a promotion." I should have stopped there, but fatigue and weeks of his constant digs had eroded my patience. Against my better judgment, I added softly, "This could change everything for me." His face darkened. For a brief second, I thought he might leave. But then his eyes darted to the laptop on my desk, the one gleaming symbol of all the hours I'd poured into my work, of everything I was building for myself. He stepped into the room, muttering under his breath, You think you're better than everyone else, walking around like you're some big shot. You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me." I stood, instinctively putting a hand on the laptop as if I could shield it from him. "Dad, please. I need to finish this. Just let me work." That was the moment the line was crossed. With a suddenness that froze me in place, he shoved past me, his hand coming down on the laptop with brutal force. The crack of the screen echoed like gunfire. The machine toppled off the desk, crashing against the floor. I gasped, scrambling to pick it up. But it was too late. The screen was fractured, flickering with distorted colors before going black. My files, my weeks of preparation, my future gone in an instant. I turned to him, my voice trembling. "Why would you do that? Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" And then came the words I'll never forget. His voice wasn't just drunk, it was deliberate, cold, and laced with venom. "Maybe now you'll stop thinking you're better than me. Maybe now you'll see you're nothing without me." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I had always known he resented me, that he wanted to keep me small. But in that moment I understood the truth. This wasn't just anger. It was sabotage. He wanted me to fail, to stay trapped under his roof and under his control. As he staggered out of the room, leaving me kneeling in front of the shattered remains of my laptop, something inside me hardened. The grief of losing my work was real. But beneath it, another feeling was rising, sharp, clear, and undeniable. I would not let him be the author of my failure. That night, amidst the broken glass and the heavy silence, I made a quiet promise to myself. His attempt to destroy me would not end my story. If anything, it would become the reason I finally rose. The morning after the wreckage, I woke to the sound of his whistling in the kitchen. It was casual, off-key, and maddeningly cheerful, as though the previous night had been erased from memory. My laptop sat on the desk in my room like a corpse, its screen cracked, keyboard bent, the casing warped. I had tried turning it on several times, but all I got was a sad, flickering glow before it went dark again. I forced myself to get dressed and head into the kitchen. He was there at the table, sipping coffee, the newspaper spread out in front of him. He looked up when I entered, and the smirk that curled across his lips told me everything. He remembered. He wasn't pretending to forget, he was pretending it didn't matter. "Morning," he said casually, as if nothing had happened. Then, with a mocking tilt of his head, he added, "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Or are you still crying over your little toy?" A knot formed in my stomach. I wanted to scream at him, to demand why he would destroy something so vital to me. But the look in his eyes warned me. He wanted the reaction. He wanted the fight. Instead, I muttered, "I'll figure something out." He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You always think you're so resourceful. Let's see how resourceful you are without your gadgets." That smugness wasn't enough for him. A few hours later, I discovered just how far his cruelty extended. While frantically searching through drawers for my external backup drive, the one saving grace that might have held my work, I realized it was gone. I turned the house upside down. Every shelf, every box, every bag, nothing. When I came back into the living room, flushed and desperate, he was there on the couch, flipping channels on the television. His grin was slow, deliberate, like a cat toying with a trapped bird. "Lose something?" he asked, his tone dripping with false innocence. My throat tightened. "Where is it?" He shrugged, not even looking at me. "Maybe you left it at work. Maybe you misplaced it. Maybe you don't need it at all." Then he glanced over at me, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Maybe this is life's way of showing you you're not cut out for that promotion." I stood frozen, torn between fury and disbelief. The man who should have been my protector, my father, had become the very obstacle I needed to overcome. It wasn't enough for him to break the laptop. He wanted to ensure that every path to success was blocked, that I would walk into that presentation empty-handed, humiliated, and defeated. For him, my failure was proof of his control, and for me, it was gasoline on a fire I hadn't yet learned how to harness. The day wore on, and with each passing hour, the stakes grew higher. The presentation was less than 24 hours away, and every attempt I made to salvage my files hit a dead end. Without the laptop or the backup, I had nothing but scraps of handwritten notes and the fading memory of slides I had painstakingly built. I felt the walls closing in, and for the first time, the weight of what he had done truly threatened to crush me. If I walked into that room unprepared, the promotion would slip through my fingers. Months of work, countless late nights, every sacrifice, it would all be for nothing. And that's exactly what he wanted. I could see it in his satisfied silence as he watched me pace the house. He had doubled down, pushing me into a corner so tight I could barely breathe. But what he didn't realize, what he could never have understood, was that corners have a way of forcing you to find a way out. By late afternoon, exhaustion pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. I had torn the house apart twice, searching for that backup drive. Every drawer pulled open, every box emptied, every closet rifled through. Nothing. Each time I circled back into the living room, he was there lounging on the couch, remote in hand, with that same self-satisfied smirk. At one point, I caught the faintest glimpse of something tucked under a stack of magazines near his chair. For half a second, I thought it might be the drive. My heart leapt as I reached for it, only for him to place his hand casually over the pile. His eyes locked on mine, and his grin widened. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The message was clear. He had it, and he wanted me to know I couldn't touch it. The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard, aching ball. All those months of work, my late nights, my carefully rehearsed words, the endless refining of every detail, he was holding it hostage out of nothing more than spite. I stood there, hands trembling, trying to form words. Why are you doing this? I'm your daughter. Don't you want me to succeed? He let out a sharp laugh, bitter and humorless. Succeed? You? Don't make me laugh. You've always thought you were better than me. Always chasing some dream, acting like you're smarter, stronger, more capable. Well, here's the truth. Sweetheart, you're nothing without me. You live under my roof. You eat my food, and tomorrow, when you walk into that office with nothing to show, they'll see it too. His words hit harder than the destruction of the laptop. The venom wasn't subtle anymore. He wasn't hiding behind jokes or drunken mutters. He was laying it bare. His goal wasn't to teach me humility or bring me down a peg. His goal was to crush me, to ensure I failed so miserably that I would never dare to rise again. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to let him see me collapse. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked back to my room. My breaths came sharp and shallow, my chest tight. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow me whole. I saw myself standing in that boardroom, empty-handed, humiliated. My colleagues' eyes filled with pity. I saw my boss shaking his head, the promotion slipping away forever. And then, something inside me hardened. It was like steel cooling into place. If this was the game my father wanted to play, then I had to decide whether to keep being his victim or to finally, once and for all, fight back. I sat down at my desk, staring at the broken shell of my laptop. In its cracked screen, I caught a faint reflection of myself. tired, angry, but far from defeated. That's when the shift happened. I realized I had spent so much of my life reacting to him, letting his words dictate how I felt, how I moved, how I dreamed. But not this time. Not when everything I had worked for was on the line. The breaking point wasn't just about the laptop or the missing files. It was about him. It was about deciding, in that moment, that I would no longer let his bitterness define my future. I whispered to myself, the words barely audible but firm as a vow, "No more. You won't take this from me." And with that promise, the fire that had been smoldering inside me ignited. I didn't know how yet, but I would find a way. His sabotage wouldn't be my downfall, it would become the very reason I rose higher than ever before. That night, after the confrontation in the living room, I sat in the quiet of my room with the pieces of my broken laptop spread across the desk. The glow of the shattered screen flickered once, then died for good. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tracing the cracks, before finally pushing it aside. I knew I had two choices: surrender to the disaster or find another way forward. And surrender was not an option. I opened my notebook, the one I kept for rough ideas, scribbled notes, and last-minute flashes of inspiration. Flipping through the pages, I found fragments of the pitch, outlines of key points, sketches of diagrams, reminders of phrases I wanted to use. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then, almost absent-mindedly, I reached for my phone. I tapped into my email, searching for a message I had sent weeks earlier to a colleague. To my surprise, there it was, an early draft of my presentation, attached as a file. My pulse quickened. If one draft was there, could more be? I logged into the company's cloud system with trembling fingers. For a moment, I thought my heart might stop when the loading wheel spun, slow and unyielding. But then, like a light breaking through darkness, there they were. My drafts. Not the final version, but enough to rebuild. Enough to remind me that all was not lost. Relief washed over me. But it wasn't just relief, it was power. My father hadn't counted on this. He thought smashing the laptop would erase my work. That he had found the perfect way to make me fail. But he had underestimated me. He didn't know that I had already built safeguards, that I had unknowingly prepared for this very disaster. And then, in a flash of clarity, I realized something even greater. The story itself was my weapon. The promotion wasn't about perfect slides or dazzling visuals. It was about leadership, resilience, and the ability to adapt under pressure. What better way to prove those qualities than to walk into that room and deliver a presentation forged in fire? To stand in front of the board and tell them, truthfully, that even after sabotage, even after disaster, I still delivered? The thought steadied me. For the first time in days, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. This wasn't just about salvaging a pitch anymore. This was about showing them who I truly was. I pulled my chair closer to the desk, propped open my notebook, and began piecing it all back together. Slide by slide, point by point, I rebuilt what I could from memory and scraps. My phone buzzed with reminders of the clock ticking down, but I no longer panicked. Instead, I leaned into the rhythm, focused and deliberate. As the hours passed, I whispered the story to myself, shaping it not as a polished performance but as a raw, honest testament to persistence. I wouldn't just present data, I would present survival. By dawn, I was exhausted but ready. My father's sabotage had become my leverage. My unique weapon wasn't just the recovered drafts. It was the resilience to turn a disaster into a triumph. I closed my notebook, placed my phone beside it, and took one last look at the broken laptop on my desk. The sight no longer filled me with despair. Instead, it made me smile, because now it wasn't just a reminder of what I had lost. It was the very thing that would propel me forward. The morning of the presentation arrived, and with it, a quiet determination I hadn't felt in a long time. My hands were steady as I buttoned my blazer, smoothed down the front, and checked my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't frantic or defeated. She looked calm, resolved, ready. I carried my notebook and phone into the office, the remnants of my plan tucked neatly into the pages and files I had salvaged. As I walked down the hallway toward the conference room, I felt the usual flutter of nerves, but this time, they were accompanied by something stronger: resolve. When I stepped inside, the room was already buzzing with quiet chatter. The senior executives sat around the table, their expressions sharp, expectant. The promotion I was pitching for wasn't just any role, it was leadership of a major project that could reshape the company's future. Everyone knew the stakes. As I set my notebook on the table and connected my phone to the screen, I took a deep breath. There was no sleek presentation deck, no flawless visuals, just a few rough slides, bare bones but functional. A couple of executives exchanged quick glances, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned into the moment. Before I begin, I said, my voice steady, I want to tell you a story. Yesterday, hours before this pitch, my laptop was destroyed. Completely. Everything I had been working on for weeks gone. I let the words hang in the air. A ripple of surprise crossed their faces. I continued, but instead of letting that stop me, I chose to rebuild from memory, to focus not on what was lost, but on what truly matters: the vision, the strategy, and the leadership this project demands. What I'm about to show you isn't polished. It's raw, but it represents persistence under pressure. And that's exactly what this role requires. There was a shift in the room, subtle but real. They were listening differently now, not just to a pitch, but to a demonstration of resilience. I clicked to the first slide. The text was plain, the design unimpressive, but my words carried it. I spoke with clarity, weaving the story of the project with conviction. Every statistic, every example, I pulled not just from my notes but from memory, breathing life into the vision. When I stumbled on a missing chart, I didn't apologize or falter. Instead, I walked to the whiteboard and drew it by hand, explaining each number and arrow with confident strokes. The room leaned in, watching not just the data, but the energy behind it. By the time I reached the conclusion, I could feel it. The momentum had shifted entirely. I wasn't just pitching a project anymore. I was showing them who I was. Someone who could face disaster and still deliver. Someone who could lead even when the tools were stripped away. I closed my notebook, looked around the room, and finished with a calm certainty. This project isn't about perfection, it's about resilience, adaptability, and vision. Yesterday, my work was destroyed. Today, I rebuilt it. And tomorrow, I'll lead this project with that same determination. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncertain. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are recalibrating what they thought they knew. And in that moment, I knew I had done it. When I left the office that afternoon, the weight on my shoulders was gone. The executives hadn't given me an answer yet. Those decisions always took time, but their faces, their nods, the energy in that room, I knew. Deep down, I knew I had impressed them. Not in spite of the disaster, but because of it. I walked through the front door of my father's house with a calmness he hadn't seen from me in a long while. He was waiting in the living room, sprawled across the couch, the television flickering in the background. He didn't even glance up at first. When he finally did, his grin was already forming, as if he'd been rehearsing it all day. So, he drawled, "How bad did you bomb? Did they laugh you out of the room? I told you, you're nothing without me." I set my bag down gently, almost ceremoniously, and met his eyes. For once, I didn't feel the sting of his words. I didn't feel the heat of anger rising in my chest. Instead, I felt an almost startling sense of clarity. "Actually," I said quietly, "they were impressed. More impressed than they've ever been." The grin froze on his face. He blinked, then forced a laugh. "Don't lie to me. You had nothing to show. You were a wreck this morning." I shook my head. "No, I wasn't a wreck. I rebuilt everything. I told them the truth that my work was destroyed. But I adapted. I showed them I could think on my feet." Do you know what they said? They said anyone who can pull that off is leadership material. For the first time in years, he had no words. His mouth opened, then closed again. His face turned red, his eyes narrowing as though he could glare the truth out of existence. "You're making this up," he spat. "You're trying to make me look like a fool." "No," I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. "You did that yourself. You thought you were destroying me. But all you did was give me the chance to prove myself in a way I never could have otherwise. Your sabotage didn't break me, it made me stronger." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He stared at me, rage simmering just beneath the surface. But there was nothing he could say. For once, he wasn't in control of the story. I picked up my bag and started toward my room, leaving him there with the weight of his own failure. And though he didn't admit it aloud, I could see it in his eyes. He knew. He had lost. Asterisk. A week later, the email arrived. I remember the way my heart thudded as the notification popped up on my phone. The subject line bold and unmistakable. "Promotion decision." I opened it slowly, almost afraid the words might change if I looked too quickly. But there it was, clear as day. "Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you the leadership position." For a moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, hardly able to breathe. Then the relief came, flooding through me, warm and overwhelming. I had done it. Despite everything, no. Because of everything I had done it. I couldn't keep the joy inside. I called one of my closest colleagues, someone who had supported me throughout the process. As soon as she picked up, I blurted out, "I got it." They gave me the promotion. Her laughter and cheers filled the line, and soon we were both talking over each other, celebrating every hard-earned victory that had led to this moment. And then I noticed him. My father was sitting in the kitchen, just within earshot, nursing a beer. At first, he didn't react, but as I continued the call, listening to my colleague repeat the praise the executives had given me, the way they admired my resilience, how they said I had stood out more than anyone else, his expression began to shift. The bottle paused halfway to his lips. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward me, then away again. He was hearing every word, and with each one, the irony cut deeper. The very thing he had tried to use to humiliate me, the broken laptop, the sabotage, the hopelessness, had become the reason I succeeded. Without his cruelty, I never would have had the chance to prove my adaptability so clearly. I hung up the phone, and the silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but firm. "You wanted me to fail. You tried to destroy me. But all you did was hand me the proof I needed to win. The promotion is mine, and nothing you do can take that away." His face twisted with anger, disbelief, and something else, something almost like fear. For the first time, I saw the realization dawn on him. His control over me was slipping. The weapon he had wielded against me had backfired, and there was no undoing it. I walked past him, my steps steady, my shoulders lighter than they had felt in years. For once, the power was mine. In the weeks that followed, life began to shift in ways I hadn't dared to imagine before. The promotion came with a raise that finally gave me the freedom I had been craving. Within a month, I found a small but comfortable apartment, nothing extravagant, but mine. The first night I slept there, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the quiet hum of the city outside my window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Moving out wasn't just about leaving his house. It was about stepping out from under his shadow. For so long, I had been tethered to his bitterness, pulled down by his constant attempts to make me small. Now, the tether was cut. I could breathe. I could build a life without his voice in my ear, tearing me down at every turn. As for my father, the consequences of his actions didn't vanish into silence. My family relatives, who had always been on the periphery, began to see him differently. Word of what happened spread, not because I shouted it from the rooftops, but because the truth has a way of seeping out. My cousins, my aunts, even my younger siblings began to recognize the pattern. The man who had spent years claiming to be the head of the family, the one everyone owed respect to, was now exposed for what he truly was. A man so consumed by envy that he tried to sabotage his own daughter's future. He didn't apologize. I never expected him to. Instead, he grew quieter, his jabs less frequent, his smug confidence dulled. It was as though he finally understood that his power over me was gone. And without that power, his cruelty lost its edge. I didn't hate him. Hate would have kept me tied to him just as much as fear once had. Instead, I learned to let go, to accept that some people, no matter how close by blood, will never be able to celebrate your growth. They see your success as their failure, your progress as their loss, and that is a burden only they can carry. For me, the new normal was a life lived on my own terms. My work flourished under the new role. I built a team, mentored younger colleagues, and threw myself into challenges with a confidence I never would have had if I hadn't endured that night of sabotage. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very act my father intended to destroy me became the crucible that sharpened me into someone stronger, steadier, and more capable. The broken laptop remained with me for a while, tucked in a closet, too painful to throw away but too symbolic to repair. Eventually, I realized it wasn't a reminder of what I had lost, it was a reminder of what I had overcome. When I finally let it go, donating its parts to a recycling center, it felt like closing a chapter I no longer needed to reread. And so, the story ended not with his triumph, but with mine. He tried to shatter me, but instead, he revealed the steel within me. The lesson I carried forward was simple, though it took me years to truly understand. Sabotage can only break you if you let it. Sometimes, the very thing meant to destroy you becomes the fire that forges your strength. And in the quiet of my new apartment, with the weight of his bitterness no longer pressing against me, I knew I had risen not just in my career, but in my life. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.